Ever wonder what makes really creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lily Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how new ideas come to life and become paintings, sculptures, plays, or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community and explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. Okay, so I don't know about you, but until very recently, if someone said IRS art appraiser, I would have imagined a man in an ill-fitting suit with a briefcase, a sour demeanor, and who had a cynical attitude about the claimed values of art, like the value police. Not a fair assessment, I know, but I have been audited, and I just assumed that auditors and appraisers for the IRS were cut from the same cloth. Well, that theory was completely disrupted when I met my next guest, Robin Bonner. Back when I did the interview with Summers Randolph, he had mentioned off mic that he wanted me to meet Robin, who had recently moved back to Santa Fe. Because I trust Summers' opinion when it comes to great people, I made a mental note. Months later, when Robin reached out to me, I enthusiastically agreed to have coffee with her. Then she informed me that the meeting would have to be at her house because she was temporarily housebound. Well, apparently upon arrival at her new place in Santa Fe, while changing a ceiling bulb in her portal, Robin took a tumble. One of those, I can't believe that just happened tumbles, and then you realize you're really hurt. So when I went to Robin's house to meet her, she was still healing. It wasn't really supposed to be an interview, but I took my mic just in case because something just told me that there was more to her story. And boy, was there. About 2 sentences into our conversation, I asked her if it was okay for me to record. And I am so glad I did. Hers is one of the most unpredictable paths to a government job that I could ever imagine, and certainly one of the most exciting. Meet Robin Bonner, art sleuth. All right, so I'm with Robin Bonner, and I literally just met her, and I asked her if it would be okay if I recorded this because I just know this is going to be a fascinating story. I was just asking Robin where she was from because of her southern accent, and then she started to tell me she was from South Texas, and she was telling me about the fact that she had gone to UT and was studying elementary education.
Because back then, I'm 76 years old, so I graduated from high school in 66, and back then what you did was you went to college, you found yourself a mate, you got married, you had babies. Well, I wasn't interested in any of that. But my art background, because I'm an art appraiser, my art background actually began in South Texas when I was little, and my mother wanted to give us something to do, okay, because, it was hot. There really wasn't a whole lot for you to do when you were a little child, and I had 2 older brothers, and they were off running around. And so Mother would give me a paintbrush and a can of water, and she said, go out and paint the redwood table that we used to have in our backyard. And so I went out there, and you dip the brush in the water, and then you drag it across the redwood table, and it actually colors it. It becomes darker.
Right.
So I thought that was great. So I painted that redwood table for years until it finally rotted. And then I started painting the tree trunks. And they did the same thing. Okay. So by the time I get to art school, my teacher says that I had a facility with a paintbrush that most people don't have. And it was all because my mother had me out in the back, painting, using this paintbrush. I mean, it was very interesting. But anyway, Mother used to send me to art classes on Tuesday afternoons, and I hated it because nobody else went but me. And then one of my teachers told Mother that I had some talent and ability, so she continued to make me go to these art classes. And then one day I thought, this is really kind of interesting. I like it. So when I got to high school, I started taking art classes. And then I went to college, and when I was in college, I said, what am I going to do with myself? And people said, well, you go to college, you get married, it doesn't matter, just major in elementary education. So I did that, and I was so incredibly bored. I just hated it. And what I would do, though, to entertain myself is I would take all these weird classes, like finite topics in mathematics or something that I would never be good in, okay? But anyway, I found them interesting. So after about 2 years of that, I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And this was like 1968, so this was when people hitchhiked. So I said, I'm going to hitchhike around the world. I want to go around the world, being very adventuresome and having 2 older brothers. I thought, I can do anything, I'm independent. So I hitchhiked from Corpus Christi, Texas, where I was born, hitchhiked all the way up to Canada and had good experiences. These truckers would pick me up and they were afraid of me because they thought I was a boy, but once they picked me up and talked to me, they realized I was a girl and they thought I was going to rob them. But what I had done is I had cut my hair really short, so they thought I was a boy. All right.
So you were traveling incognito deliberately?
Sort of, yeah.
Well, as a safety precaution?
Yeah, I was probably naive back then, but I wasn't real stupid. So I said, okay, I'm going to cut my hair. I don't want anybody picking me up thinking that I'm a girl, really. I wanted to kind of look like a boy. And so I had all these truck drivers that would, they said, well, send us a postcard. Let me know you're okay. Everywhere I went, people were so nice to me. And by the time I ended this journey, I had more money in my pocket than when I started out. People would give me, dollars here and there and everything. But the most interesting hitchhiking gig was when I got to Canada. I was in Montreal, and I stayed in all these youth hostels. So I answered an ad on the bulletin board at the youth hostel, and it was from this boy who, I say boy because we were really young, who was in college, and he wanted a ride to go with him across Canada to Vancouver in a little convertible, and we were going to camp out along the way. So I said, so I answered the ad, and he interviewed me, and he said, well, you have to go meet my mother, and she has to agree. I thought, you're kidding. So anyway, I go meet his mother. She obviously thought I was okay. So we start out across Canada, and of course, the first night we're in this tent together, and he tries something. I go, no, I'm not into that. So he left me alone the whole time. We had a great time. I brushed my teeth in glacial waters, and it was fabulous. So I get to Vancouver, and I'm hitchhiking down the street. And my deal was never get into a car with 2 men, okay, only one. And there were 2 guys in this old Volkswagen bus, and they were all scruffy looking hippies. And I thought they looked totally innocent. And so I went ahead and got in. And the driver says to me that he just bought this big boat, a 50-foot Choy catch, and it's coming into Seattle. He's looking for a crew. Well, me, wanting to go around the world at this point, okay, said, well, I know how to sail because my brother was Commodore of the Yacht Club in South Texas, and I want to be on your boat. So he said, okay. And then he said, he didn't know anything about me. I didn't know anything about him. And he says, well, let's go have dinner. He said, if you could have anything you want, what would you choose? And I said, anything. I'd like to have lobster. He goes, okay. Here we are, really scruffy. I'm in these cut-off jeans with this Mexican blouse and, looking not attractive. And so
looking very 1968.
Yes. And so, flip-flops, the whole thing. So we pull up, and they all had jeans and T-shirts on and long scruffy hair and beards. So we pull into this restaurant, and we go into the restaurant, and I'm like, they will never seat us in here. It is too fancy and nice. The maitre d' comes up and says to the driver of the van, he says, yes, Mr. Cobb, I have a table for you right over here. We sit down. Turns out he was one of the heirs to Coca-Cola. And so he had hired me to be on his boat, and he asked me where I was staying. I said, local youth hostel, and he says, oh no, I own a bunch of buildings downtown. You can stay in the penthouse of one of my buildings, where I stayed for like a month until the boat came in, and then I lived on the boat for about 6 months. And then he couldn't get papers to get out into international waters. They were all hung up, and winter was coming. So I ended up getting off the boat because I thought, I don't want to be here for another whole 6 months. Got off the boat, went to stay with a friend of mine in Vancouver, and then decided I was going to immigrate into Canada. So I go back down to Texas on the bus to get all my papers together, and I had to have $1,500 or something. So I get all that together. I go back to Canada, and in the meantime, I had gotten this job in Vancouver on a horse farm, because I used to have a horse, and I used to ride quarter horses, and I used to do barrels and some roping and all that stuff in South Texas. So I said, I advertised, and I got all kinds of weird responses. But anyway, this one was legit, and so I was going to work on this horse farm. I was supposed to manage it. Well, I get to the border, and they closed their border. All these people, I think, from Africa had immigrated at the time, and it overloaded the circuit, so they couldn't let me in.
So I'd have a question. Back when you were hitchhiking from on the East Coast, did you know that you were going to go into Canada? Did you have the right paperwork to get over the border in the first place? And then it was 68 or 69, so there was probably a lot of activity on the borders because of the Vietnam War. So obviously, being a woman, that probably didn't impact you, but just in terms of the sheer numbers trying to get into Canada, did that have an impact on you?
Going from the East Coast into Montreal, no, nothing. Actually, I'll tell you why. I think this is why. When I was in upstate New York, I was at a truck stop waiting for somebody to take me over the line into Montreal, or go somewhere. I don't know. I didn't, I was up for anything. And the owner of a trucking company at the truck stop came over to me and said, "You're not getting in the truck with any of my drivers." And he bought me a bus ticket to Montreal.
You had the most, there was angels on your shoulders.
Tell me about it. So anyway, so that's how I got to Montreal. I was in the bus, and nobody stopped us. I did nothing. I don't remember anything. I didn't have any visa or any, I didn't even, I probably had a passport on me because I wanted to go around the world, but I really don't remember any problems whatsoever.
Wow. Okay, so you're in Vancouver. You've come back from Texas. You're trying to get into Vancouver.
I can't get in.
You can't get in.
So I called my brother in Asheville, North Carolina, and I say to him and his wife, I said, "I don't know what I'm going to do. Can I come stay with you all for a while?" Myra says, "Yes." Myra and I were like sisters because my brother got married really young. All right, so Myra says yes, and Jack says no. And so I go anyway. And on the way, I met somebody who knew of some professors at a private girls' school called Lake Erie College in Painesville, Ohio. And he talked me into going to school there. But I had gotten to Asheville, and I was waitressing for a while there, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I said, I said, what have I ever done where I could just lose myself in it? And I remembered that when I did my artwork, I just would go somewhere else, and time didn't exist to me, and it totally engrossed me. So I said, okay, I'm going to go be an artist. So I remembered that this person had talked about Lake Erie College, and they had Rhodes Scholars from both the East and the West Coast, and I thought, well, this might be an interesting place to go. It was small, one of the top 10 girls' schools at the time, and I thought, I think that's what I want to do. So after about a month in Asheville, and that was a whole nother interesting experience. But anyway, I left and went to Lake Erie College and graduated magna cum laude, and then went back to UT. I'm going to cut this short because it goes on and on. But anyway, I go back to UT. I did a stint in graduate school down at Instituto Allende in Mexico because my dad said he would send me there if I wanted to go there. So I did a little bit of time there, and I ended up doing some drawings for an archaeological excavation. I went back to UT. I did some baccalaureate work there in painting and worked for an archaeologist. I got a job with an archaeologist doing all of his drawings for him over in southern Italy in Metaponto, which was the first Greek settlement in southern Italy. I know it goes on and on.
My God!
So then I was his assistant back at UT. So I did that for like 4 years. And then after that, I went back and worked for my dad for a little while, and he wanted me to continue working for him. He owned an office supplies, furniture, and printing company, and I thought, I'm not doing this. So I went off to be an artist, and I thought, how am I going to make a living? Now, you got to remember, we're like 1970s something. And so I thought, well, I can do portraits. I was always good at life drawing, so I can do portraits. So I hired one of my sorority sisters to go out and to various towns around Texas and talk to my sorority sisters and show them my work and see if they would hire me to do portraits of their children or whatever. So I did that for like another 4 years, made a living at it. It was fine. And then people started asking me to put together collections. Somebody asked me to run a gallery and, on and on. And so I gave up the portrait thing. I ended up in Arizona running a gallery. Then I came back to Corpus Christi. I did not like Arizona. I was in Scottsdale, Arizona. I did not like it. Went back to Corpus Christi, and somebody there who had a gallery said to me, I want you to be the director of my gallery, and if you can make a profit, I'm just going to hand you the keys. So I knew everybody in Corpus Christi. After about 3 months, I turned a profit. It wasn't hard. And he handed me the keys to the gallery, and it wasn't the art inventory, but he had outfitted this fabulous space. So,
and what kind of art was it?
At the time, it was second and third tier impressionist and post-impressionist paintings.
Okay.
And because everybody down in South Texas thought that's what art was something that happened in France and Paris at the turn of the century. You know what I'm talking about. All right, so I did that. That was fine with me. I didn't care. And I thought, what am I going to do? I'm in here, and I used to describe Corpus, and I still do, as it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. All right. So I thought, man, I'm in trouble. What am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? So there was a man that was born in Corpus Christi. He was a couple of years older than me, and he had moved to New York City. He was brilliant, spoke 9 different languages. He was the director of Grace Bordnick's gallery on 57th Street for years. And I called him up and I said, look, I've got this issue. I got a gallery here. Would you be interested in going into partnership with me? He said, sure. And so we did that. And he took me by the hand and he introduced me to who's who in New York City. And we put on some big shows. We did a big, huge Milton Avery show that got press all over Texas. Sally Avery, his wife, came down for the show. And so we did this. Okay, and he was gay, and he got AIDS. This was like 1984, something like that. Anyway, developed AIDS, and he died, and I thought, well, now what? So I closed the gallery. I went to Houston, and I was a private dealer there until, not put together some big collections, until like 1987, I guess, whenever the oil business went defunct. And I thought, now what am I going to do? Because I went for 2 years without hardly any income. And I thought, well, I guess I need a job. So I put some feelers out, and Butterfields in San Francisco offered me a job as head of their art department. And they flew me up there for a week, but I didn't think they would pay me enough to live in San Francisco. So I declined. I went back. Somebody in Washington, D.C., called me up and said he owned an international art transport company and he wanted a salesperson and a manager and would I be interested? And I thought, not really, but I'll go talk to you. And so I did, and he said, you can pretty much do whatever you want. And so I said, well, this sounds good. So never in a million years did I ever think I would live in Washington, D.C. It's not the center of the art world. But I took the job, and then after about 2 years, we got married. And then we got divorced about 7 or 8 years later. It was too much togetherness. And I said, what am I going to do? So I didn't want to get back in the gallery business. I said, I'm going to be an art appraiser. I want something low-key. So I said, I'm going to be an art appraiser. So I went through all the certification to be an art appraiser. And I had an office there, and then I moved to Santa Fe in 2000, from 2007 to 9. I moved to Santa Fe, where I always wanted to live, established an office here, was doing fine, and then to the end of 2008, Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, and that was the end of everything. And I thought, okay, here I am again. Now what am I going to do? So I knew the person who was head of art appraisal services at the IRS, Karen Carolyn, and she called me up. She said, we have an opening. They have only 4 people there. They review all of the items, all the claim values on items that have either been donated to museums, left in estates, or gifted. And I knew who they were, but I mean, I knew about the department, I knew everything, and I knew Karen because I was chair of an organization called Art Table at the time in Washington, D.C. So anyway, she said, we got 4 people. They're here till they die. They don't ever leave, but we've got somebody leaving. Would you be interested in applying for the job? I said, I don't know. Let me think about it. So I thought, Robin, you need to get a real job because you don't know what's going to happen with the economy. So I said to myself, all right, I'm going to put everything in storage in Santa Fe. I'm going to apply for the job. If they offer it to me, I'll consider it, okay? But in the meantime, what I would do is put everything in storage, and if I took it, I would go to I'd go to Washington, D.C., and if I didn't like it, I would come back to Santa Fe, and all my stuff would be here. All right, so they called me up, and they offered me the job, and I thought, I really don't want to work for the government, but I need a job. So I took it, put everything in storage, moved to Washington, D.C., and I did not want to move there. I moved back kicking and screaming. It was like leaving a lover. Moved back kicking and screaming, and the job turned out to be fabulous. I mean, for an appraiser, best job ever. I got to work on things that I studied in art school. I mean, where do you have a chance to do something like that? I mean, just fabulous things. And the most important thing and the most interesting thing to me was not just determining the fair market value to see if the claim value was correct. Eventually, we started working with all the compliance issues on the part of the appraiser and the taxpayer. So what I was doing was looking for fraud. And I was looking for fraud, and I was looking for all these cheaters. And that was fun.
Wow. So hold on. I have a thousand questions. So along the way, your first exposure is to this gallery, sort of second-tier impressionist artwork.
Yeah. Well, no, the first gallery was in Arizona, and I was working in a gallery in Scottsdale, and they sold mainly cowboys on horses in bronze. I mean, that was what was selling out there, and it was all of the Cowboy Artists of America. Was those people. I met all those people. But I mean, I honestly, if I saw another cowboy on a horse in bronze, I thought I was going to throw up. I just thought, I can't keep looking. I don't want to do this. All right. So I left and went to Texas, to Corpus.
Well, what's interesting to me about this whole thing, and I want to hear kind of a little bit more of, we've gotten a great overview, but I want to hear more of the style art journey from Impressionists to cowboys till you can't see them anymore, and then what came next in terms of, I mean, you must have gotten quite a breadth of exposure to different pockets of the art world.
My first gallery gig was in Arizona, and so that was looking at cowboy art, Southwestern art. Then I went to Texas, and there was a little bit more of that going on because the Cowboy Artists of America were a big deal back then in the 80s. And I'm in Texas, okay? So people wanted cowboys on horses.
And because you're selling the art, you're getting a sense of what the price of and quality of things in that category. So Southwestern art is a very specific category, very distinct from European Impressionist art.
Absolutely.
And so you've now gotten a little bit of exposure to both of these things. And then what came next?
Okay, so I go to Texas, and it's Impressionist, Post-Impressionist. Then when I went into partnership with Roberto White, that was his name. When I went into partnership with him, we started doing modern and contemporary. So it was a whole so I got this exposure over a huge wide range of types and styles and periods of art. And then I went from that, I went to Houston. I put together, I worked with a big, huge collection of post-impressionist paintings, important collection. I also put together collections of Impressionists and Post-Impressionists.
So when you say put together, somebody would hire you to make purchases on their behalf, and you were going where to make these purchases?
New York, but I was going to New York to buy that. I also did it in Corpus Christi.
And what kind of provenance were you required by?
Well,
I mean, like, how did you learn?
Back then, you really didn't have, provenance was not what it is now. Okay, provenance is everything.
Probably because of everything you uncovered with the IRS.
But a lot of it, back then, I bought from major galleries. And so I didn't really worry about it. I just was smart enough to know you just don't go buy something off of the street.
Right. So the galleries were the clearinghouse.
I went to them and they provided a provenance. But back then, you really didn't get a whole lot. And there wasn't research necessarily done on provenance unless, like a Modigliani or something, there were everybody knew that there were a lot of fakes out there, and there are more now. But I never sold a Modigliani, but if I would have, then the gallery would have furnished me with all the research. I don't know. I was young and probably didn't know what I know now back then, and most people didn't know. And so there were a lot of things that were fake that were traded back then. I didn't run into one, thank goodness.
But were you buying based on a particular aesthetic of the client, like I would have as an interior designer, or were you making your own selections based on, like, describe a little bit about how you were putting together a collection? What were you looking for?
Well, I looked for quality. Okay, first of all, I knew what they wanted. Like, I had one big collector in Corpus Christi, and I knew that she used to live in New York, and she loved Impressionist and Post-Impressionist work. So I would work with galleries in New York to try to find the best I could that she could afford and present them to her, and either she said yes or no. It was easy back then. It is not the same now. Nowadays, you have to have provenance up the wazoo. You have to check with IFAR to make sure they check.
And a lot more people competing for a small number of artworks.
Yeah.
In that
vein. Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot left out there, but most of it's in big collections or it's been donated to museums. So it's hard. But that's one of the reasons why people started all of a sudden buying photographs. Photographs were affordable. The better works by the artists were available. And so the photography market took off. And now it's the contemporary market. It's interesting. There are over 400 billionaires in the United States. And of the 400, about 60% buy art. All right. So what are they buying? They're going after contemporary art because they can buy the best works by living artists. And they're not having to pay some of them might sell for $50 million, but they're not having to pay the huge prices for an Impressionist or Post-Impressionist period or I don't know, something from the Roman period or whatever. They don't have to pay those huge prices and get mediocre quality. But there are also all these museums that are being established by collectors. They call them vanity museums. And they have their collection. Now, what are they going to do with it? So they hire some famous architect to build a museum for them. They put their collection in there, but it doesn't quite fill the museum. So what do? They need to look for more work. Well, where are they going to go? They're going to go to contemporary artists. And that's what's fueled this whole market for contemporary artists. And that's what's allowed all of these artists today to make a living with their art. But the problem is, there's so many people buying this stuff that they're pushing the price up for artists that have just graduated from Yale. And, maybe they've been working for a year or two and their work is first valued at maybe $6,000, $10,000. And then the next year it goes up to $20,000 to $50,000. And then the third year, somebody, maybe a hedge fund manager, wants to promote this artist and put it in their portfolio and manage it, okay, and control the market. So all of a sudden they start putting these things up at auction and the works start getting flipped, which galleries get upset about and the artists gets upset about. But some of these artists' work went up to, $400,000, $300,000, $400,000. This past spring in the auctions, those same artists' work would sell for $10,000 to $20,000. The market just crashed on it. Yeah. And they're all upset about it because they went out and bought a new townhouse and cars and they live this extravagant lifestyle and now they don't have the money to keep it up. and it has ruined their market.
Yeah, I actually I know one or two people who got into that buying frenzy, and when things went south with their business, and they had to liquidate what they thought was their blue chip artwork commodity, not and in some cases that it was art that they did. They related to it, so they weren't just buying anything blindly. They did have a relationship that did maybe hang in their living room at some point. But there were people that are just buying stuff and putting it in warehouses, and that never sees the light of day.
I used to have people that wanted me to put a collection together for them so they could hang it in the house and impress the museum director when they invited him over for dinner. Or they wanted me just to buy for an investment, put it in a vault, and I just wouldn't do it. My idea was you get it on the wall, whether they understand it or like it or not, you just get it on the wall, and at some point they're going to have to look at it. And when they look at it, it's going to increase their knowledge about themselves. They're going to learn something, and they still may not like it or want to live with it much longer or whatever, but they're going to learn something from it. So that was my whole purpose is, if you want to impress the museum collector, I don't care. I'll put it on your walls. But if you want me to put it in a vault, no. I drew the line there.
When I was in college, I wrote my college thesis on the Chase Manhattan Bank art collection.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to interview David Rockefeller. And, he was putting abstract expressionists in banks and in people's offices where normally you'd get a watercolor of somebody fly fishing, right? Oh, yeah. And so he was really challenging the people in his company at Chase to, what you just said, be with art all day long, every day. And he would rotate the collection. So, people didn't get a choice about what art. I mean, maybe some of the higher ups did get to choose, but that artwork was being circulated through bank offices, in public spaces. And I think that's just amazing that he had the wherewithal to do that. Because I think, as you said, whether you like it or not, at the end of the day, living with a significant piece of art it changes you.
Yeah, I did. I had an appraisal project with the U.S. Department of State in D.C., and it was like a 5-year contract. So I appraised all their works on paper. And one of the things that I did for them is I would interview the artist about the work. And rather than just doing the fair market value, which is all they really asked me for, I said, no, I'm going to go further, because a lot of what they bought was abstract. And I thought, it's hanging in State Department's offices. I mean, some of them are heads of state, but a lot of them are just in the hallways or whatever. And I thought, people are not going to be able to relate to this. So I'd interview the artist about what the piece was about to them personally when they created it. And they put it on a little, plaque next to the work. And I had a lot of really good responses about that. It helped people relate to it a little bit better. You don't necessarily have to know what the artist was trying to do. But I thought, this is good because I know these people. I mean, the government types in general, they're not going to really pay attention when they're walking down the hallway. They'll look at it and go, that's pretty, I like the colors or whatever. But to really introduce them to what was going through the artist's mind when they created it, I thought maybe this will help them understand contemporary art or abstract art. That was a fun thing to do. That was a fun project.
And was that before the IRS or after the IRS?
Before the IRS. That was when I was in Washington. When was that? Back in 2000, I don't know, before I moved out here, 2000 to 2005, probably something like that, yeah.
And so by that time, there's the contemporary art market has completely taken off. I mean, it's before it's crashed and burned, but, so there's a lot of art flooding the market. How did you decide who to look at? Which artists piqued your interest?
You mean when I was putting together collections a long time ago, or more, or what?
Just in general. I mean, pick any phase of your career you want.
I'll tell you something interesting about me. When I worked as an artist, and all artists do this, okay, you sort of go to another level of consciousness and you create, okay? So I do that when I look at art. It's like I can walk, I walk in, I'll look at the picture, and if it takes me elsewhere, I spend time with it. And as an appraiser, it's been beneficial for me because it's almost like I can walk into the painting, understand what the artist did, and of course, having worked as an artist, I understand application of paint and how you start with what you know works and then you work around that. I understood it all, so it really benefited me as an appraiser. But I always look for quality. It's not necessarily, you're like this, I'm sure, too. After you've seen so much, you look for, let me back up. You educate yourself by going to look. That's what you have to do. Don't look at the junky stuff. Go look at the best you can find. Go to New York, go to the museums, go to maybe the Museum of Fine Arts here, but Site Santa Fe. But you have to go someplace and look at the best. And then when you see something that's awful, you can identify it as, that doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? You may not know why it doesn't work, but intuitively you're going to know this is bad. It's not, I don't have the feeling I had when I saw this fabulous Monet, okay? It's when I saw the Monet, all I wanted to do was sit there and look at it for hours. But when I saw somebody's rendition of Hollyhocks, it didn't do anything to me but me looking at it and saying, pretty color, I recognize the subject, but I'm going to be bored with it after a couple of days. Are you going to be bored with Monet's water lilies? No. So I look for
as
quality.
An appraiser, aside from the fact that obviously Monet has a reputation, and say you have a really good painter, contemporary living painter, who is doing something that painter is really tapped into the field, they're really bringing something, they're really transmitting something, and then you've got a Monet who's obviously has all those same characteristics. How do you look at those two paintings side by side and make an evaluation as to the value of it? Take the market value out of the Monet, comparing apples to apples from two different eras. What are you looking for?
It's kind of the same. You look at the Monet. I look at the Monet, and it transposes me elsewhere. It's probably a great painting. I look at what the new artist has done, and it may or may not take me anywhere. But if it takes me to that same place, I would look at that and say, that artist is going places. But I can't but as far as value, I can say, it's fabulous, this is a great piece, okay? That artist is going someplace. But can I value it based on what's going to happen in the future? No. I have to value it based on facts, and those facts are based on comparables. And if something only sold, if some of his work, since he's new or she's new, it's only selling for $10,000 or $20,000, that's the value on it. Even though I may know in the long run, or I don't know, but I might assume that in the long run, because the work is so unique and it does take me elsewhere, okay, then I might assume that that this artist is going places in the future. But you never know. Some artists are so difficult to work with, nobody wants to work with them, and their market just sinks.
Well, and then there's some of those, like we were talking about earlier, some of those blue chip artists, I'm putting air quotes around that, blue chip artists whose works got artificially inflated,
yeah.
And then people were buying them, and they're either hanging them or storing them or whatever they did, and then they would turn around to go sell them again, and they can't get pennies on the dollar for what they bought them for, and the galleries are sort of in a pickle because they don't want to buy them back. There's a secondary market for some of those artists.
That's right. It's a real problem. I could tell you all kinds of things about the market and IRS, and my job at the IRS was fascinating. But the market is basically controlled by a handful of people, and those are the people with the money. That it's always about money, and Are
they collectors, or are they the auction houses?
They're usually collectors. They're the ones that usually have all the money, and the auction houses work with them, the galleries work with them, and the museums work with them. And one of the ways that it'll work is, let's just say a gallery finds an artist, and they believe in the artist. They go to one of their collectors and they say, okay, you give me $100,000 and I'll sell you 5 of this artist's work for, below market value. And this gives him the opportunity to work for another year, and he can get enough work to put on a show. And I'm going to have a show in the gallery, and I'm good friends with the curator at the Met, and they're going to do a show for him there too. So everybody profits from this thing, and the collector is the one that makes the most money. Okay, the artist doesn't necessarily. I mean, those works that he sold for, I don't know, $10,000 or $5,000 each, after the show at the museum and the gallery, then his work that's been sold prior is usually put up, a lot of times if the collector wants to make money off of it, they put it up at auction and sell it. And, he loses out on a piece that maybe sells for 2 or 3 times what he sold it for.
So do you track the, God, I have so many questions for you about between forgeries and the scandals and the inflated prices. And there was just a recent story in the news about the Russian oligarch who took Sotheby's or Christie's to court because of some inflating of prices. The Salvador Mundi, or whatever that, Leonardo Salvador Mundi piece. And, it was a very interesting case. And one of the things that made it interesting is that nobody really felt sorry for either side. I mean, these were hugely inflated prices. The
buyer beware.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what, I had a client one time who spent way too much money on something. And he was an attorney. He said, I'd take the gallery to court if I could, but he said, because of buyer beware, he said, it's my fault. I should have checked into it. So, galleries can do whatever they want, but nowadays it's, as far as charging, but now it's interesting because there are so many collectors out there that are savvy, and they have access to these art sites like Ask Art and Art Price that advertise, say you're looking up, I don't know, Christopher Wool, it's a contemporary artist. Everything that's sold at auction since his work started selling at auction, maybe was probably in the late 70s, early 80s, is listed on ArtNet with where it was sold, when, for how much, an image. I mean, you get everything, all the identifying characteristics. And that's what us as appraisers use often, along with private sales, because you have to decide what's the most relevant market for the purpose of the appraisal. But because collectors have access to all that information, they can say to the gallery, look, here's one that's so similar, date, size, image, blah, blah, and it sold for only $50,000, yet you're selling yours for $100,000. I'm not going to pay that.
Wow. And so are there forgeries happening in the contemporary market?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously, there was that wonderful film called Who the Bleep is Jackson Pollock?
Oh, yeah, that. And also, there was a major case with Knoedler Gallery in New York, and, Anne, who was the director, had promoted and sold a lot of paintings by a little man who was Chinese, who were doing these rip-offs and the fakes, and and he hooked up with this woman who, Gloria, I can't remember her last name. Anyway, she bought them from him for peanuts, made, I don't remember how many millions, 30 millions off of this deal, but then she'd take them to Anne, and Anne would sell them for each one for these ridiculous amounts, and because Knoedler had financial problems at the time, and they were all recouping their losses, and there was a Jackson Pollock in that group, and Anne had it right behind her desk, and it was the last name Pollock was misspelled. And certainly she would have seen that, but she promoted and sold these works anyway. I mean, it was a big scale. It was a lot.
So when did the IRS sort of get savvy and start really cracking down on this stuff?
Well, I don't know about the IRS with that, but it would have been the FBI would have come in and said, well, people started suing her. I think it was, he's an actor. I can't think of his name right now, but anyway, I think Ann had. I may have this mixed up with Mary Boone. She was involved in some stuff too. But anyway, somebody bought one of the paintings. All right, and Alec Baldwin. That's who I was thinking about. But I think he sued Mary Boone, I believe. But there was a collector who got. I think it was a Pollock painting, and he sent it to Jamie Martin, I believe is his last name. He does forensic authentication. And so Jamie said the paint that was used in this picture was not available at the time. It didn't exist. And so it couldn't be a Pollock. Well, then this couple goes back and, to Ann and says, you need to buy this back. This is wrong. I mean, that started the whole mess. Okay, then other people found out about it. Then they would have theirs checked. And sure enough, it wasn't real either. And it snowballed on them.
Wow. Now, you said more of an FBI thing, which I totally get, but isn't there a lot of money laundering in the art,
there are all
universe?
Kinds of things. Like one of the things, speaking of IRS, that collectors do, they get together, like you come over to my house, okay, you see a painting on the wall, let's just say it's a Monet, you love it, and you have another one at your house, or you have something that's very desirable. So you ask me to go over to your house and look at it, because maybe you all might want to just exchange, and then there you don't have to pay capital gains. All right, so there's a lot of that goes on among big collectors. Sometimes they're putting important paintings on their yachts. There's this big movement towards all these very wealthy people wanting to buy big, huge yachts. That started during COVID when they wanted to get away, and now it's like whoever has the biggest yacht is the richest person. And so their guests come onto this yacht and they see the art, and a lot of times they do their own exchanges, and so nobody's having to pay capital gains. There's a lot of that goes on. The IRS is aware of it. It's hard to catch people, but.
And what about with all of the international art sales? I mean,
well,
to your point.
That would be international. But, nowadays the galleries and the auction houses are so concerned about fakes and about selling something that's going to come back to them or get them in trouble. They do as much research as they can. They contact the experts. But the problem is, it's like the Andy Warhol Foundation. They do not want to authenticate anymore, because if they say something's not correct, then the collector goes back to them and sues them, because their work has now gone from being worth $10 million to zero. Nobody wants to buy it if the authenticator has said it's not correct. So the authenticator group for all these really well-known artists has shrunk. People don't want to write catalog raisonnés anymore. And so it's hard to get your works authenticated. So when you're buying something from a contemporary artist, you need to make sure it's signed and dated, if not on the front, on the back, and even get some kind of a certificate. A transfer of title is usually pretty, is good to have too, but you need to keep all that stuff in your files. And something that's very important for the IRS is if you donate a painting, you have to fill out a form called an 8283. And there are little blocks in their fields that you have to fill in. If you don't, your whole deduction gets denied. And one of them is, how did you acquire it, where and when? All right, so how did you acquire it? Did you inherit it from Aunt B? And if you bought it from Aunt B, the next one is, what was the value? And you don't know, so you have to fill in, I don't know, it was, I inherited it, but you have to say something, you can't leave it blank, which is kind of strange. But let's just say that you bought something for $10,000, you're donating it a year and a day later to be able to get full fair market value. Your appraiser says it's increased fivefold. So let's say you buy it for $10,000, and then they do a fair market value appraisal for $50,000. Well, when you fill out that form, the 8283, and you say you bought it one year for 10,000, and then the next year it increased 50,000. The IRS wants to see that because that raises flags. So that's why they want you to fill out those fields. There's a reason for that.
Well, why would it raise flags if it's some young artist, like Basquiat when he first got there, and then Basquiat, after he dies?
That's a good question, because I did an appraisal recently, and the piece, when he bought it, was worth $70,000. He tried to donate it a year and a day later for. I could have appraised it at $300,000. All right, it was an LA artist. The market out there just went nuts. All the Asians have money. They came into LA with money. The big galleries in New York all opened up adjuncts in LA to take advantage of. Everybody follows the money. Okay, so they were out there, and these artists that were working out there, and this artist was actually pretty good, but all of a sudden there were lines formed of collectors wanting this particular artist's work, and the gallery, having all this demand, established something called a program. This is very interesting. In order to buy this artist's work, you had to buy two works, one by another artist handled by the gallery that was not as well known and not as valuable, and then you had to donate it to a museum of their choice, the gallery's choice, so that that could help raise the reputation of the artist. Oh yeah, then you had to spend $70,000 like my client did, in addition to buying the first work that you didn't want. You had to spend $70,000 on that one. So by the time a year and a day came around and I had to value it, there were no auction records as a new artist or whatever. I couldn't find any comparables. So, because nothing was resold, everybody wanted to hold on to it. But there was one painting on the market that these two galleries that handled the artist knew about. And they said, it wasn't really on the market yet, but they said if this collector decided to sell that painting, they could get $300,000 for it, because nobody wants to wait in line and buy this, do this whole program thing. They just want the artwork and put it on their wall. Interesting, huh? And a lot of galleries function that way. If they have artists that are really in demand, they control it all. And they say, this is what you have to do in order for us to promote the lower valued unknown artists. Yeah.
Wow. So as an artist yourself, how has this whole experience of being on the other side, on the sort of commercial side of it, how has that affected your thinking about what it's like to, move paint around a canvas?
Well, it's interesting because working as an artist, it's all right-brained. I got in the business world, it's all left-brained, pretty much. So,
except for that moment when you're looking at a piece, standing in front of a piece of artwork, trying to determine whether it's got the shine,
Yeah, and so I've got these well-developed left and right brains, but I've thought about going back to making art now, at this stage. And it's like, what do you do? After you've looked at all the great art and you've done all this and you know so much, it's like, then what do you do? And I don't know. My tendency is, don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Just go to your right brain, go there and do whatever comes out and see what it is. And so I may go back to doing that. But
you'd certainly be doing it for you and not with some aspirational, becoming the next it girl, right?
I'm doing it for the process.
Yeah.
Because the process is what feeds me and feeds most artists. It's not the end result. Most artists will say, well, I started out doing, Picasso said this, he starts out doing X, takes on a mind of its own and ends up being Y. But he looks at the Y and he goes, that looks pretty darn good. All right. So even though he understands that he really wasn't totally involved in the process, or not totally left-brained involved in the process.
Well, I'm just fascinated because you're talking about something that's so distinct and different from everything else I've talked to the artists about in this series so far. about the process of making and so accessing the field in order to be the vehicle for that to come through you. And then, we have very little conversation about what happens when the piece is finished and it makes its way on to, the next phase, to the collector's wall. I mean, sometimes we talk about, the satisfaction that an artist can derive from seeing their piece hanging in situ and that takes on a whole nother light. But it almost feels like we're talking about two different universes here.
You are. Like I said, it's left and right brain. I mean, the artist makes it, okay? There are some artists that maybe paint to sell. There's probably more of that today than there used to be because they want to make a living and it's hard. But most of it is you do it because you have to do it. It's like writers, dancers, anybody. You probably did the same thing. You do it because you have to. And the more you do it, the more addicting it becomes. And so for most artists, I think it's really difficult to put a price on that experience. It's very personal to them. It's really about them on a very deep level. So you're just sort of hanging out your laundry there for everybody to look at in a lot of ways. The good news is that not everybody understands it, so you can still keep
you can kind of hide behind it.
Yeah, you can still keep the mystery going. But I think it's very difficult for artists to sell their own work. And that's why galleries proliferate, I think, is that artists want to just be involved in the making of art. They don't want to have to worry about selling it. And it's a whole nother thing. And if you have a gallery, you really have to be good at selling. I've watched people, that own galleries or that are really good at selling, and they tell stories. And I'm sure they make up 9/10 of them, but it works. People want to relate to it, and it helps them connect to it.
So in your vast experience, what's the difference between a collector who's doing it just for the pure love of art? Take the money. I mean, yes, they need money in order to acquire the art, but have you encountered collectors who are just as passionate about being with the art as an artist is about making it? I mean, it's hard to compare those two things, but I mean, somebody the money is not the motivation. They're not building a portfolio. They just love having art everywhere.
They get it. I think they understand it. I think they relate to it. They walk into it. It takes them elsewhere. But those people are becoming fewer and farther between. Number one, to buy really good art, it takes a lot of money nowadays. And certainly there are lots of people, like I said, 400 billionaires just in the United States. But most people today, this is what I hear from dealers, most people today, they're buying because they want the name, they want Warhol on their wall, they want to impress people, they want to buy themselves culture. They want to, they're using this is interesting. I just read, this is like a subset of where you want me to go, but I just read this article the other day about how designers, first they buy the painting, okay? And I thought, well, that's not bad, that's good, but they don't know what the painting is. They're buying a name. And people just want to be able to say, I have a Warhol.
Right.
It could be the worst Warhol in the world, but it's signed Andy Warhol, okay? So they think it's important. Most collectors today, even if they're just buying for their portfolio, hire advisors. And when you go to the showrooms and for the auctions at Christie's and Sotheby's, you see all these potential buyers, and each one generally, not everybody, but generally they will all have advisors. And a lot of those advisors probably never even had an art history class. It's because the art world is unregulated. They can say whatever they want. If the buyer is unsuspecting, they're not going to know. Say they met the person at dinner and with a good friend, and the advisor says, oh, you need a so-and-so. I have access to this painting, and why don't you go with me to Christie's to go look at it? And all of a sudden they have become art advisors, and they don't know anything. And I laugh. I mean, a lot of times it's fun to go to those previews and just watch the people that are there and what they're doing.
And how gullible they are.
How gullible, or how long do they stand in front of the piece? And, there are all these art fairs now. There's so much information about the art world, but there's so many art fairs now that, there were all these articles written about people getting weary of art fairs because there's one probably there's like an auction every day going on somewhere. But there's so many art fairs. And some of the bigger galleries like Aquavella in New York, Michael Finley, who's one of the directors there, he told me, I said, are you going to go to Art Basel Miami, which is one of the two biggest art fairs in the United States? He said, no, we don't go there anymore. I said, what do you mean you don't go there anymore? And he said, our buyers don't go to the art fairs, which I thought was really interesting because for years they did. It was a way for them to see, Art Basel Miami, my God, there are hundreds of galleries there. It was a way for them to see as much art as possible in one location over a very short period of time. But I think they've kind of gotten to the point where, because of provenance and the fakes and all these other issues, they're going to put their trust and faith in one gallery. They don't need to go to an art fair. And most of the time, these people will buy from the gallery before the work is shown at the art fair. Okay, it's sold even before it gets shown. So, and there are people that I believe now with the big dealers like Aquavella who really want to understand. And some of my clients, I was amazed at all the books they had read on the artists whose works they had bought. So, there are those, but still a lot of them, they'll put together a collection just so they can give it to the museum and have their name on the wall or something. There's all of that. And it's usually young people.
Yeah. So for the artists out there who are listening, well, for everybody who's listening, given your experience, is there what's the hope for restoring integrity to this
That's a great
universe?
question. My friends and I who've been in the art business for forever are just amazed at how art has just become this monetary commodity and how the art world has changed, and the big galleries are monopolies. They're developing into monopolies. And how they have adjuncts all over the world. Wherever the money is, they pop one right there. And, where it's going and what's going to happen, and I don't think any of that's going away.
So you don't see the pendulum swinging back to a sort of more authentic...
It's like realism in art, re-emerged, portraiture re-emerged. Things are cyclical. I think as people put together these collections, even for their portfolios, I think eventually, at least I hope, but I think it'll happen, eventually they actually get involved in it. Somebody may come over and say, oh, you have a Warhol. Gee, I read that Andy Warhol got shot. And then the collector goes, he got shot? I didn't know that. All right. And then they get interested and they may go read up on it. And then they maybe want to go buy another Warhol for the right reasons. All right. So I think there's hope. But for the artist, all I can say is you have to be really careful who you're working with. And you have to remember, like with everything, you're your own advocate, okay? So if some dealer comes in and says, go with my gallery, I can increase your prices 5-fold over a period of 3 years, don't just all of a sudden get stars in your eyes thinking, oh, look, I can buy a Mercedes or whatever. Realize that may happen, but your market is probably going to crash and burn. And what's that going to do to you? There are so many artists that were so important over the past 50 years, and now you go to buy one of their works and, maybe it used to sell in the 6 figures and now it's back down to the, 5 figures? So, you just need to be aware, try to be smart, talk to other artists, interview with quite a few galleries and see what they'll do for you. And if they want to all of a sudden skyrocket your prices, just say no and tell them, I don't want you selling to people that are going to flip.
And what about the trend of artists representing themselves and just going directly to the thing? What do you think about that?
I like that. I think I've told people before, just establish your own website and do that. Now, I don't know if it works for them. You might know better than me. You're interviewing them. But the problem is, again, then you're the one selling your own artwork and doing your own promoting, and artists generally don't like that. And then you have to take time out of your work schedule to be answering emails that aren't going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I wonder what the secret hope is of, I haven't asked this question of anybody yet, but I think obviously any artist hopes that their work will connect with people and they will make it big to the big time. I interview a lot of mid-career artists who saw the experience of like the big uptake on their work, and now they used to be somebody kind of significant, and now they've got a lot of backstock, and there isn't a secondary market necessarily for their work. They're passionate enough about it. They have to keep, as you said, the addiction is still there. That's what they need to do. That's what they want to do. But I have to think that it's got to be much more satisfying for an artist to sell to at a more average price to a group of collectors who really love their work and want to live with it and be with it every day versus, the one-hit wonder that makes it off to, some huge market.
Because they, when somebody looks at your work and they tell you that it really resonates with them, that's what the artist is trying to do in the first place. They want the viewer to understand them, to relate to them. And so when the viewer says, that your work just brought me to tears, to me, that would be, if I was a serious artist, that would be much more important to me than somebody paying six figures for something that was highly inflated just so I could buy a house.
So we're running a little bit out of time, but one thing I'm curious to ask you is, so what do you foresee happening with all these people who've made all these huge collections? Their kids don't even have a house to put the collection in because they're not interested. And so there are these huge numbers of collections that are going to be kind of coming into your wheelhouse to appraise for their inheritance value or whatever. So what's the new trend with all this artwork that's coming onto the market from people?
Well, interestingly, there are a lot of auction houses that are popping up to be able to accommodate these people's collections. Are they selling like great guns? Not necessarily. And the prices now, the estimates are so low, I can't believe it.
So this is a good time to buy art if you want to buy art.
It's a great time to buy what they used to call brown furniture,
right.
American furniture.
Yeah, sure.
There are some great buys out there. Younger people don't want it. It's a great time to buy decorative objects, crystal, china, and young people don't want it. I guess they don't want to have to carry it around, and they certainly don't want to polish silver. So it's a great time to buy all those things. But right now, until the election and probably up until the new year, people are skittish about what's happening with interest rates. They're skittish about the elections, what's going to happen. And so things are pretty dead. LA, I understand, I just talked to a dealer out there, the market just about crashed. So, but I've talked to people here, and they seem to think they're doing pretty well.
Well, one of the things about Santa Fe I like to think is that a lot of the activity that I see here is people buying something that they connect with really personally. It's a much more personal, much more intimate market. And I guess we'll end up there with the moral of the story is buy what you love. Absolutely.
Michael Finley, who I mentioned earlier, director of Aqua Valley Galleries, and including myself, everybody looks at him as God. He's just so helpful. He's brilliant. Anyway, he wrote a book, something about learning to see or something. I can't remember the name of it, but you could look it up online. And rather than talking about the value of everything monetarily, he talks about buy it because it resonates with you. Buy it because you like it. Artists create out of love. Okay, there are two motivating factors in life, love and fear. And they create out of love. So that's what they're putting on the canvas. And you as a viewer need to be able to take time to experience that, and then it enriches your life.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic spontaneous experience. Well, thanks for joining us today. Please like and follow us on artstorming.org, where you'll find a list of our shows, a transcript of this episode with links to the guest page, as well as our other projects. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms.